Hello there, welcome or welcome back. If you're familiar with this channel, you'll know I'm a big fan of both psychology and movies. So today we're going to be combining the two, and we're going to be looking at various different characters and how they represent the archetypal traits of personality. So how this is going to work is that we're going to be looking at each of the 5 traits from the Big 5 personality model, and for each of those we're going to be looking at the low end and the high end of that spectrum, and then I'm going to show you a character that perfectly represents what it means to be high or low in each of those 5 traits. So we're going to start with probably the most well known of the Big 5 personality traits, which is extraversion, and extraversion is in many ways the dimension of positive emotion. However, most people when they think of extraversion, they think of your overall social tendencies, so how likely you are to be around other people and enjoy it, but also how much energy you get from doing so. So the character who perfectly sums up what it is to have high extraversion, or in other words be an extrovert, is Ferris Bueller from the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Throughout the film we continually see his social confidence, how likable he tends to be among his peers, but also how much energy he gets from even being in large crowds. Ferris Bueller is, in my opinion, the stereotypical extrovert. He's the life and soul of the party, other people get energy while they're around him, and he also thrives in a social environment. So moving on to low extraversion then, or in other words, what it means to embody an introvert, we're going to be looking at the character Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. Here you can see he's the polar opposite of someone like Ferris Bueller. He doesn't enjoy necessarily being around other people, he doesn't thrive in social environments with large crowds, and often he ends up being a little bit socially awkward. Introverts often tend to be a lot more reflective, and they do their thinking and learning both internally and also by themselves when compared with extroverts who often just surround themselves with other people and usually just speak their mind. Because introverts experience less positive emotion when surrounded by other people, they tend to gravitate towards environments that are quieter, either with less people or even by themselves. Over time this reinforces itself, and that's what kind of gives you that feeling where introverts in the extreme are often a little bit socially awkward because they have less experience and practice in these environments. So now we're going to move on to the next trait in the Big 5, which is agreeableness. And this is kind of correlated with compassion, empathy, but also how much you tend to be a people pleaser. A character that perfectly sums up what it means to have high agreeableness is Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings. People with high agreeableness often tend to put other people's needs above their own, but they're also concerned with what other people think of them in general. A few words that sum up what it means to have high agreeableness are nurturing, caring, kind, friendly, but also things such as conflict avoidant. People with high agreeableness are always striving to keep the peace. They don't enjoy conflict, arguments, or any kind of competition typically. The only time when they get involved with these kinds of activities is when they're either left with no choice or when their deep-rooted principles override their social and personality tendencies. So if this is what it means to have high agreeableness, then the opposite should be fairly obvious, and someone with low agreeableness is often defined by low empathy, they don't really care what other people think, and this is perfectly embodied in the character Hannibal Lecter. While it's easy to jump to the stereotype of a psychopath when we think of someone with low empathy, this isn't always the case, and often when we think of psychopaths they actually fit into their own category, and it's not necessarily related with any one of the Big 5 personality traits, but at the same time psychopaths typically also have low empathy and low agreeableness. The other thing to know about having low agreeableness is it's often related to having a high tendency towards competition and conflict. So while people pleasers are people who are known to have high agreeableness, the people who enjoy competition, who are more ruthless and more ambitious and less willing to put the feelings of others in the way of their goals, this is someone who represents low agreeableness. So now moving on to the trait of conscientiousness, which is related to your work ethic, how likely you are to finish what you've started, but also orderliness as well. In my opinion, the character who perfectly sums up what it means to have high conscientiousness is Hermione Granger from the Harry Potter series. Hermione is extremely studious, she's meticulous when it comes to any kind of coursework or exams, and this defining trait is what leads her to be often thought of as the smart one or the know-it-all. People with high conscientiousness typically perform well in their work or career, but also they tend to be very organised and they really enjoy and strive towards orderliness. Interestingly, the trait that best predicts your future career success is the trait conscientiousness. Even though there are a lot of other factors that come into it, it's the trait of conscientiousness that dictates how likely you are to persevere with various tasks and how much you actually strive towards work, and also how hard it is for you to switch off from it. So it makes sense then that the character that I've chosen to represent low conscientiousness is Captain Jack Sparrow from the Pirates of the Caribbean series. Sometimes people with low conscientiousness are referred to as lazy, but it's more about motivation than actual laziness. People with low conscientiousness tend to be less motivated to work continually, and they enjoy relaxing, and therefore it's not something that you can necessarily hold against them if it's a built-in personality trait where they don't actually enjoy or get the same reward as someone with high conscientiousness when it comes to the pursuit of work or their career. So now we move on to the trait of neuroticism, which is all about negative emotion. And this is why it has two main components, which are withdrawal and volatility. And withdrawal is all about the anticipation of what kind of future negative events may take place, and volatility is how you react when something negative happens to you. A common byproduct of withdrawal is anxiety, because it's all about the anticipation of what could go wrong, and this leads you in a situation where fear takes over and ends up preventing you from taking on the various challenges that you otherwise would have taken on. Volatility then is more about how you react when something actually does go wrong in a negative context. So this is someone who could be seen as emotional, easily agitated, or easily upset. And then the various emotions that you can experience when this happens could be something like crying, or anger, or even just depression. The character who I think perfectly embodies what it means to be neurotic is Nina from The Black Swan. Throughout the movie, we can see just how emotionally delicate she can be. When things go wrong, she tends to overreact and take it very badly, but also she's very anticipatory about what could go wrong, and all of these things combine to form that trait of neuroticism. On the other end of the spectrum then, with someone who has low neuroticism, and this is best summed up by the phrase cool as a cucumber, and the character I've chosen is Jason Bourne. The reason being is that throughout the movie or the trilogy, he experiences so many negative situations, he's put in situations of conflict, things happen to him or around him that by most people's standards is considered extreme, and throughout the entire process he remains level-headed, he remains focused, and he doesn't lose control of his emotions, at least for the most part. And now we move on to the last trait, which is openness. And broadly speaking, this can be broken down into two sub-traits, which are aesthetics and intellect. And aesthetics is really about aesthetic sensitivity, so how much you like to experience novelty and how much you are sensitive to things such as art or poetry and various types of creative activities. To people with lower openness, often people with high openness come across as strange, quirky, or weird, because these high openness people are often trying to push the boundaries of what's possible, to try and think outside the box, and to try to immerse themselves in things that are non-conventional. But the other sub-trait of openness is intellect. And despite what most people would think, intellect is not actually intelligence. Intelligence is more related to IQ. Although there is some correlation between IQ and intellect is more about abstract thinking, your tendency to explore ideas and try to work things out from an abstract perspective, as opposed to literal thinking, which is more about trying to work out what's directly in front of you rather than how things work more broadly or more generally. So I'm sort of going to break the rule just for this trait, because when it comes to high openness, because of those two sub-traits, I'm going to add two characters rather than one, and the first one is Willy Wonka from the movie Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and this perfectly sums up what it means to have high aesthetic openness. Whereas the second example is John Nash from A Beautiful Mind, because this perfectly represents what it means to have high intellectual openness. You can see though what both characters have in common and what both sub-traits have in common is really about thinking outside the box, as opposed to thinking conventionally, liking rules and boundaries. Someone with high openness is all about thinking outside what is typically considered normal, and you're trying to push the boundaries either creatively or intellectually. So to round things off, I'm going with the character of Uncle Vernon as someone who perfectly embodies low openness, because they're conventional, they like rules, they like discipline, and they don't like to push boundaries. Because people with low openness often prefer structures and conventions, they are best suited for things such as the military, where you're often taught and told not to question the status quo, and therefore knowing what is and what should be is often something they strive for, as opposed to what could be or the possibilities that exist outside of what we already know and do. While I might not have covered this idea specifically in this video, I have covered the idea of personality traits and the Big Five in previous videos, but it's important to know in any of the traits within the Big Five, there's no such thing as good or bad, or one trait is better than the other. Sure, there are some traits that are more facilitating of certain pursuits, such as conscientiousness being suited towards career success, but at the same time, everything comes with pros and cons. So someone with high conscientiousness is very suited towards ambition and the pursuit of something, but at the same time, they also struggle to switch off, and they don't relax to the same extent as someone with low conscientiousness, who would be a lot more happy to chill, hang out with friends, or even just lay down on the beach and do potentially even nothing. If you're interested in learning more about the Big Five or personality in general, then definitely check out some of the previous videos that I've made on this channel, but also I'll link below in the description different tests that you can do and take yourself to learn more about your own personality and what percentile you have for each of those traits. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I'd really appreciate if you could like, subscribe, or leave down any comments or suggestions below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.